So at Christmas time, especially if you have kids, this is obviously a very posed picture, but it's a common occurrence around Christmas time, especially with kids, that you are waiting for it to come. And sometimes it might feel like this, someone waiting for Christmas. My brother-in-law, my sister's husband, it used to be, I don't know if it's still the case, when our family would get together at Christmas, he didn't want to wait till Christmas to actually open the presents. So his theory is that as soon as all the family is there, let's just open the presents and let's not wait. And if it's 3 days before Christmas, then who cares? Let's open the presents. Why wait? Okay, so that's his idea of if you don't have to wait, let's not wait. But generally, at Christmas time, it's a time of waiting and anticipation, and the whole Advent candle, the whole Advent season is meant to force us to think about waiting. So by the fact that there's only 2 candles lit, we know it's not Christmas. Christmas isn't here yet. We actually still have a 3rd candle and a 4th candle, and only then will Christmas come. And in some, I nearly burnt my finger there, in some Advent candle traditions, you're not supposed to kind of focus on how bad it is, but you're supposed to make yourself wait, and you focus more on the negative and the waiting, and so you might even have several sermons in December that are kind of, how hard and dark life is and how miserable everything is, with the point of we need to experience that waiting in the darkness until Christmas comes. I can't manage to do that. I can't, have like 4 weeks of depressing sermons, but that's, the point is you practice waiting because waiting is important. Okay? And especially at Christmas time, it's a time of waiting. Some of you guys who are students, you maybe have exams and you've got to work hard studying and take your exams, and then finally you're going to have your break and you can relax a little bit. But probably you students can't relax yet. You have another week or 2 of intense work, and then. Okay, so keep that in mind as today we're going to look at what I called in kind of the title of the sermon is A Tale of Two Vineyards. And we're actually going to start in the New Testament, even though we're in our series in Isaiah. And we're going to start with an incident or some teaching that Jesus gave toward the end. After he had arrived in Jerusalem, but before the crucifixion, and he was doing a lot of talking, and a lot of it was kind of confrontational talking. And he told one little story about a father who had 2 sons, and he told one of the sons, go into the vineyard and work. And the son was like, yeah, I'll do it. Okay, Dad, of course. You asked me to do it. I'm supposed to do it. I'll do it. But he didn't. And then he told the other son, you need to go into the vineyard and work. And the son was like, no, I'm not really, that's not my thing, working in the vineyard. That's for the other servants. I'm your son. I'm not supposed to do it. No, I'm not going to do it. But then he had a change of heart, and he went into the vineyard and actually worked. And, Jesus' point was, who did the will of the Father? It's not the guy who said yes. It's the guy who actually did it. But that led into another parable. So Jesus says, listen to another parable. There was a landowner who planted a vineyard, and he put a wall around it, okay, because you need to protect it, from animals and maybe from fire spreading and so forth. He dug a wine press in it, and he built a watchtower. Then he rendered the vineyard to some farmers and went away on a journey. This was a big investment on the part of this owner because, first building the wall and the tower, you had to have a lot of, financial resources to do that. And also, if you're starting the process of planting a vineyard, it's going to be several years before you're actually going to get grapes. From what I'm read, I'm not a farmer, by the way, so I don't know what I'm talking about by experience. But I read that it's like 4 years between when you start working with your vineyard before you're going to actually get grapes. So this guy is making a long-term investment, and he's putting a lot of resources, into this vineyard, and he's doing it right with the wall and the watchtower. But he rents it to some farmers, and he's going to go away. And so they're going to work in the vineyard. They're going to be able to keep a significant amount of the crop, but then because it belongs to this landowner, they're going to have to give him what his due, whatever it might be. I guess it probably varies from place to place, but that's the arrangement that has been made. But he goes off on a journey. And when harvest time approached, he sent his servants to the tenants to collect the fruit. The tenants, these tenant farmers who were working the vineyard, they seized his servants. They beat one, they killed another, and stoned a third. I mean, this is actually kind of like, Liz mentioned, and Becky mentioned Netflix movie. This is like a bad Netflix film where they don't have a good story, and so they put in a lot of violence, just to get your interest. Because it's like, they killed one of the servants? What is that about? That makes no sense. What are these people thinking? But that's how the story unfolds. He sends a servant, they beat him up and send him away. He keeps sending more, and they even kill some of these servants. Then he sent other servants to them. It's like, what is this guy thinking? I mean, that's pretty reckless. They've already killed some of his servants. What is he doing? Why is he giving them a chance to do the right thing? So he sends more servants, more than the first time. But these tenant farmers treated them the same way. Last of all, he sent his son to them. They'll respect my son, he thought. But when the tenants saw the son, they said to each other, this is the heir. This is supposed to belong to him one day. Okay, so let's just kill him, and maybe we can get his inheritance. Here again, what in the world are these guys thinking? I mean, what are they thinking? Did they really think this was going to work? Did they not know what was likely to happen? So they took him and threw him out of the vineyard and killed him. Therefore, the owner of the vineyard, when he comes, what is he going to do to those guys? So here in this telling of the story, Jesus asks that question, what do you think the owner of this vineyard is going to do? And they give the obvious answer that all of you would think. If you're watching this on a Netflix film, you're thinking, I can't wait till the end of the film comes and revenge happens. When I was a kid, I kind of loved those revenge stories, when these bad guys would do something to this poor weakling, and then he would, practice and train, and he'd get his revenge and wipe, that was when I was a kid, But there was that satisfaction. And so the people Jesus is speaking to, these religious leaders, he says he's going to bring those wretches to a wretched end. And he'll rent the vineyard to other tenants who will give him his share of the crop at harvest time. And Jesus said to them, have you never read in the scriptures? Of course, that's pretty shocking. I mean, these are the religious leaders. These are the Pharisees and the other leaders, the scribes, the teachers. Have you never read? The stone the builders rejected has become the capstone. The Lord has done this. It is marvelous in our eyes. Therefore, I tell you, the kingdom of God will be taken away from you and given to a people who will produce its fruit. He who falls on this stone will be broken to pieces, but he on whom it falls will be crushed. When the chief priests and the Pharisees heard Jesus' parables, they knew he was talking about them. And they looked for a way to arrest him, but they were afraid of the crowd because the people held that he was a prophet. Why did these leaders read themselves into Jesus' story? Jesus tells this story, and he drags them in, by saying, what is the owner of the vineyard going to do? And they said he's going to wipe those people out. But why now do these religious leaders realize Jesus is telling this story about us? When Jesus talks about those wicked tenant farmers, he thinks those are us. Why did they see themselves in the story and think that Jesus told this story about them. And it's because this parable, as so much of Jesus' teaching, has an Old Testament context. Especially many things that the prophet Isaiah says, and already both Becky and Tanya have referenced that. At the beginning of this story, when Jesus says this landowner, built a wall and a tower, it comes from Isaiah chapter 5. In Isaiah 5, this is interesting, it actually starts as a kind of love poem. It just takes a pretty bad turn, before it goes too far. Let me sing now for my well-beloved. What a great person he is who loves me. A song of my beloved concerning his vineyard. My well-beloved had a vineyard on a fertile hill, and he dug it all around. He removed its stones. He planted it with the choicest vine. He built a tower in the middle of it, and he hewed out a wine vat in it. And he expected to produce good grapes. After all this investment, that's what he expected. This is what my beloved did. What a wonderful person he is. How he cares for this vineyard. I'm so glad we love each other in this love poem. He expected it to produce good grapes. But now the poem and the fruit both turned very sour. But it produced only worthless ones. Stink fruit. And now, O inhabitants of Jerusalem and men of Judah, judge between me and my vineyard. What more was there to do for my vineyard that I have not done in it? Why, when I expected it to produce good fruit grapes, did it produce worthless ones? So now let me tell you what I'm going to do to my vineyard. I'm going to remove its hedge and it will be consumed. I will break down its wall and it will become trampled ground. I will lay it waste. It will not be pruned or hoed, but briars and thorns will come up. If you're reading Isaiah, you're going to hear briars and thorns in other texts. Briars and thorns is kind of a symbol for dry waste that's good for nothing except burning. And that's all this vineyard is going to be good for. I will also charge the clouds to rain no rain on it. And here it becomes clear that this is God speaking. The only one who can actually control the rain. He's the beloved. He's the one who did all this work for this vineyard, but it did not produce good fruit. For the vineyard of the Lord of hosts is the house of Israel, and the men of Judah his delightful plant. And he looked for justice, but only bloodshed, and for righteousness. But behold, it was just a cry of distress. The chosen one, Israel. Last week when we talked about what it means when God calls and what the word chosen means, and I said it's not primarily about the vertical relationship, but it's about their role. It's about the expectation of the effect of God's people in God's world. And this is an investment God made in his people, and there was no fruit. The purpose for their being chosen was not being fulfilled. Another thing, by the way, to look for all through the book of Isaiah is justice and righteousness. Justice and righteousness. Two parallel lines. You're going to see it constantly. Justice and righteousness. Justice and righteousness. So we're going to come back to that several times. And even this morning we're going to come back to that because in context, that's an important part of what fruit is. The fruit that God expects. It should look like justice and righteousness. So when Jesus gave that parable in Matthew 21, he's quoting parts of this, text in Isaiah chapter 5, where they recognize Israel is this vineyard, and Israel, God's people, is subject to judgment. But there's a reason why those leaders, the chief priests and the Pharisees, realized especially it was directed to them, and that's because often in Isaiah, Isaiah especially points out the role of the leaders, the fault of the leaders. And if the people are not doing well, it's because the leaders have been unfaithful. The leaders have led the people astray. And so there's special judgment that is due to the leaders. And you can see this earlier, a couple chapters earlier in Isaiah chapter 3. Again, there's going to be this vineyard image. And all through Isaiah, there's going to be this image of, often it's a vineyard, sometimes it's other kind of plants. And that's why we're going to constantly keep, Tanya's picture in front of us. I hope this will be burned into your mind and you'll have dreams, about Tanya's picture here. Okay? Okay, so I am hoping, that Tanya's going to keep producing her work of art. Though I kind of, this is not at all important, but I keep thinking, now I'm like one of those, Renaissance popes who was always, sponsoring works of art, Michelangelo. Of course, those guys were not good people so much. But anyway, okay, back to the text. But the vineyard image keeps coming up. The Lord arises to contend, and he stands to judge the people. But especially the Lord enters into judgment with the elders and princes of his people, especially the Pharisees and the chief priests, the people who should have known better, the people who had read their texts, the experts in Scripture who should have known. What were they thinking? What in the world were they thinking? He enters into judgment with the elders and princes of his people. It's you who have devoured the vineyard. The plunder of the poor is in your houses. What do you mean by crushing my people and grinding the face of the poor? Declares the Lord God of hosts. And so regularly in Isaiah, it's especially the leaders who are blamed. And once again, and I'm not going to focus on this theme today. It'll definitely come up later in sermons. But the fruit that is looked for is justice here on earth and righteousness here on earth. The problem of these leaders is that they are using their position to benefit themselves and to grind the poor down. They are not treating people rightly. There is no justice and righteousness. In chapter 5, just after that song about the vineyard, the rest of chapter 5 is all about injustice. You rich people who join house to house. So there's no room for the poor. There's no little corner of space where the marginalized people and the poor can get a living. You've used your resources to build up your resources and to squeeze out. For instance, widows and orphans, they're going to come up. People to whom justice is due. I got to be careful to not start preaching that sermon that's coming later. But that's especially in Isaiah, the fruit that is expected is justice and righteousness. And that's the fruit that is missing. But particularly here in Isaiah chapter 3, it's the leaders who are blamed, and these guys that Jesus are talking to who know these texts, who haven't before used the text to point at themselves. Jesus now is saying, this is you. And so this is why we've got to kill Jesus. We got to get rid of this guy. He thinks we're the evil leaders. We've got to shut him up. Just like it said in Matthew chapter 21. So we have two kind of images based on the vineyard in Isaiah that are very negative. And it's all about judgment. And in Matthew chapter 21, when Jesus teaches his parable based on the vineyard, it's mainly about judgment. But judgment in Isaiah and in Jesus is never the full story. And it's never the full story about the vineyard. In Isaiah chapter 5, in that song of the vineyard, is not the only prophecy about the vineyard. There's others. This is why you just have to keep reading Isaiah and keep reading Isaiah, and you're going to get to some depressing parts. I mean, there's one part, I know I'd read it before, but when I was reading it again a couple weeks ago, I thought, you've got to be kidding me. It's almost like this image, and everything is bad, and there's a chosen one. There's going to be a leader, and wow, he's going to lead his people, and God is going to drive them stake into the wall, and you can hang your coat on, it's going to be strong, and you think, oh, good, the story turned to the good, and then the last verse in the chapter, but that's going to be cut off too. And you're thinking, oh, come on. You just can't keep having this happen. We can't keep having these almost good people and then... But you're going to experience that. You're going to feel that. And we ought to feel depressed and discouraged at times reading the book of Isaiah. It should feel like waiting. And waiting, when is this story going to turn good? But it does. And one of the places that it does in Isaiah is in chapter 27. In that day, it's another phrase to look for. Maybe if you're reading Isaiah, mark every time it says, in that day, in that day. Finally, in that day, a vineyard of wine, sing of it. There'll be another song. I, the Lord, am its keeper. I water it every moment. The previous one, I'm going to withhold the rain. Now it says, I water it every moment so that no one will damage it. I guard it night and day. The Lord guards it night and day. I have no wrath. I mean, that's going to seem strange because there's plenty of wrath in the book of Isaiah. There's plenty of the wrath of God. But here, in that day, I have no wrath. Should someone give me briars and thorns in battle, I'll just step on them, burn them completely. They're of no account. Let him rely on my protection. Let him make peace with me. Let him make peace with me. In days to come, Jacob will take root. Israel will blossom and sprout, and they will fill the whole world with fruit. Very different than the previous song about the vineyard. A complete reversal. So we need to train ourselves to look for this and to wait for this. And even to understand how prophecy works in the Old Testament, and why, if we read carefully, with trained eyes, we can find such hope there. Here's another place. It's just an interesting text. Tremble for the land of my people. Thorns and briars will come up. Again, thorns and briars, thorns and briars. It's going to be a common image for dead, useless waste. Yes, the joyful houses, the jubilant city. Again, another image we're going to see repeatedly, and we're going to talk about what does a city mean, good and bad. The great, joy, and it's a great big city and shops, everything that you need, but tremble because the palace has been abandoned, the populated city forsaken. Hill and watchtower have become caves forever. Vineyard on a fertile hill, watchtower, it's all gone. It's just caves, only good for wild animals. Just wild donkeys, a pasture for flocks, but no more fruit. It's just wild. What's interesting here is hill and watchtower have become caves forever. Become caves forever. That sounds absolute. They become caves forever. Forever. I mean, that forever is forever, isn't it? No. Not in the mouth of the prophets. Not in God's world. Forever until. Isn't that just cool? That's amazing me. It amazes me. It's forever, forever until the Spirit is poured out upon us from on high. And the wilderness becomes a fertile field. And the fertile field is considered a forest. And justice will dwell in the wilderness, and righteousness will abide in the fertile field. Justice and righteousness, justice and righteousness. What God wanted all along, it's going to be. And the works of righteousness will be peace, and the service of righteousness quiet and confidence forever. Same word as forever. So you might ask, well, okay, is that forever also forever? Or is that forever going to end? Well, read Isaiah. Read how the book ends. This forever is forever. There's no reversal of this forever. This is the end of story. That's not the end of story. That's just forever until. This is forever and ever. This is the way often, poetry works and the prophetic speech language works. But you know how it is. You've sometimes used the word forever. This is going to take forever. You're after the service, you're talking to other friends and your kids want to go home. Oh, it's forever. You talk forever. It's like being on a Ryanair flight, to Australia. This flight is going to be forever. Okay. I mean, we use that word that way, and we know it's not quite forever, but sometimes things feel like forever. We're waiting for Christmas forever. It's going to take forever. It's going to be forever before I graduate. It's going to be forever before I get married. It's going to be forever. It feels like forever. Often it feels like forever, and it goes on and on and on, but forever is not always forever. Sometimes forever is a long time. Okay? Forever might be our lifetime, even. That's a long time. But our lifetime isn't forever. Not even our lifetime is forever. Okay. There's another forever that is forever. Back to Jesus' parable. After he leads these religious leaders to recognize, to read themselves into the story and to think, yeah, that's what ought to happen to those bad guys. Didn't you ever read in scriptures? The stone the builders rejected. He's quoting from a psalm here. The stone which the builders rejected, it's become the chief cornerstone. This came about from the Lord. It is marvelous in our eyes. Therefore I say to you, the kingdom of God will be taken away from you and given to a people producing the fruit of it. Jesus' parable here is mainly about judgment. I mean, it's mainly about judgment. But it's also about hope. Because he says there actually will be a people. God hasn't deviated from his plan, actually. God is faithful to his purposes, and there will be a people, and there will be a people who will produce the fruit of it. Where the story is going, it's going to continue down that path. How the story started with blessing, it's going to go that way, and like Liz talked about, her story, lots of up and downs. I mean, that's the story of life. That's a story of the Bible. That's a story of every good character in the Bible. That's the story of David, Abraham, Moses, you name it, Peter. But it's going to end well. I mean, here, one of the reasons Jesus can say this is because, in one sense, the waiting is over. The waiting that Isaiah had to do, and the people he talked to, that day started. That day started at Christmas. That day isn't over. That day is not just a 24-hour day, by the way. Okay? That day is a long period of time. We're still waiting for that day to finish, but that day has started. The dawn on that day has actually come. And Christmas changed everything. Okay, Christmas is the coming of Jesus. It has to change everything. If Jesus is Jesus, it's got to change everything. Okay. There's a new forever with the coming of Jesus. And so, even built into this story of judgment, there is hope. There is a future. There's this constant picture of God always faithful to his plan. So the Lord will build his vineyard. He's going to do it. What God set out to do, what God started to do, is going to come to completion, and the Lord will have his people. And of course, one of the signs of that is you right here. You're God's people, and there's fruit. God is producing fruit through you. You yourselves are actually a sign of God's good plan. I mean, it's amazing the different things that you do. And And, you're a fulfillment of the book of Isaiah. And another thing we're going to get to is the nations. And the nations, God is going to call the nations. And the evil nations, God is going to call. Egypt is going to be there. Assyria. The enemies of Israel. There's going to be a remnant from Assyria among God's people. It's amazing. And here we are, a sign that day has started. That day that Isaiah looked for. You, literally, seriously, look around. You are a sign of God's goodness and fruit that is being produced. It's an amazing thing. This body ought to give you hope, to be able to be here on Sunday and to have a reminder that day already started. Jesus has already come. He's already come, and he's doing his new thing, and it's happening, and we can see it, and you can touch it. I don't actually encourage you to after the service, go around and touch people, but you could if they're willing. You might need to ask permission, but you can touch the fulfillment of God's promises. You can touch the good fruit. Whoever you're sitting next to, you can touch them. You can touch the fruit. You are the fruit. You are the people living in that day. The Lord's going to have his people. However long the wait is and however dark and brown it might be, the life is already sprouting up. It's just like in that image. It's just a sprout right now. Okay? We still haven't gotten the whole tree, but that's coming. The life is already there. The life is there. The life has been born. The life is growing. For me, after this kind of message, maybe I should just leave it here. Maybe I talk too much. But as I think about, so what and now what, what should we do with this? And of course, in context, we need to take the warning. There's a lot of warnings in Isaiah, a lot of warnings in the words of Jesus. We need to take that seriously. Judgment is real. God does expect fruit of his people. We need to be serious about that. We need to think carefully about that. But for now, the main thing I want us to leave us with is just that the hope in waiting. And forever isn't necessarily forever. And I'm guessing that everyone here, there's something that you're waiting for. And it might be some part of your life where you're mainly scared or mainly depressed. You mainly have questions. For those of you maybe who have kids who are older, and maybe they're not, however you want to put it, they're not churchgoers. They don't seem to be walking with Jesus, and you're wondering about them. What's going to happen to them? Are they going to be okay? And you're waiting and wondering, and you're nervous about that. Maybe other people that you love. Maybe there's people with physical sickness. And you're waiting, is God going to heal them? It seems like forever. They've had this cancer or whatever forever. They're getting worse. And you're wondering, and you're wondering, and you're waiting, and it feels like forever. Forever is not necessarily forever. The wait might be long. But God's story always bends toward blessing. It always bends that direction. Okay? There's another forever besides our current forever. Another forever that is truly forever. That's God's forever. And we need to hold on to that. Hold on to this story. That out of darkness is light, out of death is life. We're going to sing one more song and then we'll be done today.